I would like to introduce the EDHEC Bond Risk Premium Monitor. The EDHEC Bond Risk Premium Monitor is a new public domain initiative by means of which we estimate the bond risk premium. The obvious questions are, why is it useful doing so? Which investment problems does this help solving? And what is the monitor and how does it work? Well, first of all, why are bond risk premia important? Why do bond risk premia matter? Well, they matter from an investment perspective. Put yourself in the shoes of a fixed income portfolio manager who has to decide whether to be longer or shorter duration than the benchmark against which she is assessed. Being longer or shorter duration, from the point of view of this portfolio manager, means taking more or less market risk. Assessing the magnitude of a risk premium is an essential consideration in determining whether she's likely to be well or poorly compensated by being longer or shorter duration than the benchmark. The second one comes from the ability to compare risk premia coming from different asset classes and therefore decide whether it is better to be overweighting one asset class rather than the other. Finally, risk premia inform monetary policy. Now, probably we are not central bankers, but even if we are not central bankers, it is very useful to have an idea of how monetary policy is going to unfold. I always remember Douglas Adams' advice in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy when he said he had been told that when looking for a good oracle, it was best to find the oracle that other oracles went to. So out of metaphors, when trying to divine the path, the future path of yields and rates, it is very useful to have access to the oracle, i.e. the models that central bankers use. So we want to get risk premia. Where do you get them from? I've drawn a triangle here, and at the bottom, this is what we want to get, is the risk premia. And we can get it in conceptually two different ways. First of all, we always have access to market yields. These are always available. Then we can pursue two routes. Either we can try to estimate directly risk premia by engaging in what is called a carry strategy. We invest long, we fund short, and we see whether this strategy is on average profitable and in which configuration of the yield curve it tends to be profitable. Alternatively, we can try to estimate the real world behavior of rates, and since very roughly speaking we can say that market yields that we can observe are the sum of expectations in the real world and risk premia, if we can determine expectation in the real world, we should be able to determine risk premia. It sounds enticing, but in practice is much more difficult. Take the case of Treasury bonds. Here I have plotted yields for Treasury from the 1950s up to today. Suppose that we assume that yields follow a roughly mean reverting behavior. Would you be able to tell, looking at this graph, or would a statistical model be able to tell, looking at this graph with any confidence, the reversion speed or the reversion level? Extremely difficult. So we are left with the estimation of excess returns that, as I said, come from investing long and funding short systematically. What this graph shows is, for different maturities, the excess returns reaped from this strategy from the 1970s to today. And if one squints one's eyes, one can see that on average, this strategy has been profitable. It has been worthwhile being long duration. However, one can also see that the strategy is extremely noisy. And therefore, a good metaphor is to keep in mind that detecting the risk premium is akin to detecting a gentle breeze in the middle of a raging storm. This is what we are trying to do. The other route, as I said, is trying to glean information about the future path of interest rates. Luckily, we have this source of information from the minutes of the Fed that on a quarterly basis provide what are called the blue dots, Each point here is one guess of one member of a monetary policy committee about the future level of the Fed funds at different points in time. From these, we can construct a path for the Fed fund rate, the short rate. We embed this information into this model, which has been recently published in the International Journal of Theoretical and Applied Finance, in which we have a common dynamics for the short rate, mean reverting dynamics with a reversion level here. The two twists are that the reversion level is not fixed, but is in itself mean reverting. And all of these equations here refer to the P measure, to the real world. We go to the pricing measure by adding here a market price to risk. This market price to risk, in turn, is not a constant, but is a mean reverting process itself. So if we look at this part of the equations here, this bit here, and this bit here, this refers to the real world evolution of the Fed fund rates. If I have an estimate of this real world evolution, I can make the evolution of a short rate in the model in the real world, track the information, the expectations given by the blue dots of the Fed. And this is part of the way that the model works. So let's revisit the case of Treasury bonds. Both approaches, the statistical approach and the model-based approach, have advantages, but they also have drawbacks. The statistical analysis is extremely noisy, as we have seen. The statistical analysis doesn't know anything about no arbitrage relationships. But even more important, the statistical analysis has no information about the level of rate at the point where the estimate is made. Suppose that the statistical analysis makes an estimate of a 3% risk premium. Clearly, this estimate has a different degree of plausibility according to whether the 10-year rate is at 8% or at 2%. Unfortunately, statistical analysis does not know this piece of information that the affine model approach does know about. The forward guidance-based approach, i.e. the model that makes use of the blue dots, is not without its own drawbacks. First of all, the expectation that one can read from the blue dots must be woven into a no arbitrage affine model. But these are just models with their dangers of misspecifications and miscalibration. More importantly, the affine models that use forward guidance information does not directly know about the wealth of statistical information that the excess return approach does know about. And this is where the EDHEC approach comes from, that combines statistical and model-based estimation. From a statistical point of view, we make use of the most exciting research that has taken place in the last 15 years by creating robust, powerful, and understandable risk predicting factors. And we combine this with an affine model that uses the information provided by the Fed via the blue dots. The magic sauce comes from combining the two approaches. And by doing so, we keep the responsiveness of a statistical analysis and the knowledge about the yield curve and the no arbitrage relationships. So what do the new return predicting factors, the new statistical estimates tell us? If we look here, there is a red curve in here, and these are the predictions of excess returns produced by the all factor, by the slope. As you can see, on top of it, there is a wealth of information or a wealth of signal. We have to see whether it is information or not that comes from the new models, which can be seen even more clearly in this picture here that shows the difference between the predictions given by the old factors, the slope, and the new factors. Now, the interesting thing is that these extra predictions are strongly mean reverting and highly correlated. They clearly convey a similar story, and the heart of the analysis here is to understand what this extra factor points to and to understand whether they are economically significant and not just overfitting and noise. let's put all the pieces together. In this very interesting graph, I have the estimates of the risk premium, of the term premium, given by the highly variable curves here are the estimates given by the statistical estimations. And the green curve here is the estimate given by our affine model. Now, the extraordinary thing, if you think about it, is that the sources of information are completely different. The statistical information makes use of whatever we can glean from statistical analysis of excess returns. The green line makes use of information that we get from the blue dots and no arbitrage. However, the correlation between the green line, one model, and the statistical approaches is extremely high, of the order of 90+% for some of the models and 60–70% for another model. So that is the idea. We use a combination of the two approaches using the model output as a regularizer of the noisy output coming from the statistical analysis, a regularizer that on top of it has the advantage of basing at the right level the estimate. In all of these things, trends are more important than levels, but clearly one cannot ignore levels altogether. So this is just the beginning. We intend to expand the reach of the bond risk premium monitor in several directions. Remaining in the Treasury domain, we want to extend our offering to other currencies. And for these other currencies, we intend to offer in the future a full decomposition of the yield curve in its expectation component, risk premium component, and convexity component. Understanding the convexity in the shape of the yield curve is becoming more and more important as governments all over the world are issuing bonds of longer and longer maturities. And if we gain access to reliable data sources, the next obvious frontier is credit fixed income. Risk premia are indeed important, risk premium are indeed everywhere, and that is why we hope that the EDHEC risk premium monitor will make a useful contribution to the understanding of risk premia.